Hi, everybody. Got my old school notes right here. Sorry, my iPad broke. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to, it's great to see everyone here at Huntington Beach. Future Proof. This is absolutely amazing. My name is Amy Dutola, and I'm thrilled to moderate as we dive into the topic that's become increasingly crucial for all of us in our industry, and that's cybersecurity. Before we paddle out into today's discussion, let's discuss a significant wave that has crashed over all of us. Recently, we experienced a startling national data breach exposing 200 million social security numbers and an astonishing 2.9 billion rows of data that is now on the dark web. This incident is more than just a ripple, it's a wake-up call for wealth managers everywhere. Data security isn't merely an IT issue anymore. It is paramount for our businesses. As advisors, we are custodians of our clients' financial information. And this breach highlights the urgency that we really need to prioritize cybersecurity in our business. Today, we'll navigate some of the implications of breaches, explore best practices for keeping our clients' data safe, and strengthen the bonds of trust with our clients. So joining me on the panel today, Bart McDonough, Shane Cummings, and Mario Cullen. Let's paddle into this critical landscape together and ensure we're ready to ride the wave of change. So I'm going to start with you, Bart. Sorry, I got my notes right here. As a cyber expert working with wealth firms, what are the biggest cybersecurity challenges facing the wealth management industry?
Yeah, so as Amy said, my name is Bart McDonough, CEO and founder of a company called Agio, and besides the kind of shameless plug nature of that, I tell you that because everything I talk about is going to be colored. Almost all of our clients are wealth managers, hedge funds, private equity, and so everything I kind of give you is going to have that context. We work every day not only doing testing, but looking at results. When I think about the challenges, the actual question facing the wealth management industry, I think of kind of three big things. One is cognitive dissonance, two is awareness, and three is the kind of regulatory stuff. And you probably think about regulatory as the most. So what do I mean by cognitive dissonance? How many of you, just by show of hand, think next year, 2025, it'll be worse, cybersecurity, attacks, breaches, than it was the prior year? Show of hands, right? And when you know something's going to be worse, that means that you're taking action, right? You're doing something different than you did last year. And how many of you are actually actively doing something different? Most of you aren't. Some, I see one hand, right? And what's the cognitive dissonance about it is when you realize that it's going to be worse, but you don't do something. And so then you justify it. And how do you justify it? You say, well, no one's going to attack me. Russia doesn't care about me. North Korea doesn't care about me, so they're going to attack the big guys. They're going to go after the big companies, but not little old me. And little old me can be a two-person shop. I've heard people that have 500 employees and go, I'm a small shop, right? Everyone thinks they're small relative to the Department of Defense or the IRS or Citibank, right? Everyone's small. So that's number one. One, we just don't think it's going to happen to us, right? So this is the cognitive dissonance. Second is awareness. And I compare this to like, how do you protect your home? I grew up in Oklahoma. What was the biggest threat? Tornadoes, right? And guess what Oklahoma doesn't have? Basements, right? Like, it's like if you lived on top of a hill, you had no risk of flood, you installed a whole bunch of like flood protection, pumps and all that kind of stuff. That's what happens in cybersecurity. People don't understand, is there risk flood, fire, landslide, tornado, hurricane? They take a blanket approach. And so make sure you work with someone who can talk to you about what your risks are. Because depending on the attributes of your firm, your risks are going to be different. And then third, regulatory. The regulators don't really know what they're doing, right? Big surprise. They're trying, and it's necessary, but they don't know. And so how do you prove to the regulators, how do you prove to a board, investors in your firm that you're actually secure? It's a really hard the worst question I get is, hey, Bart, am I secure? Right? That's like saying, hey, Bart, am I not exposed to any risk in the market? That's just not a good question, right? So there's not a good answer. How do you answer the question, am I compliant? It's a hard question. Make sure you have that expertise. Make sure you work with someone that has that expertise. So all three of those are really big challenges facing this industry.
So Mario, how about you? Like, as someone who's running a wealth firm, tell me a little bit about, the threats that you're seeing and what you're doing.
I think the biggest thing for us, or that I've seen across the industry, is just piggybacking on what Bart said, is an awareness of the fact that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And having that preparation, having something that's tailored to your specific risks of your firm. At the end of the day, I love what Bart does, and we work with consultants, and you can have the most sophisticated suite of antivirus, endpoint protection, things of that nature, but something's going to get in. So probably to me, from a firm perspective, from a practical perspective, it's you can have the most sophisticated software and application in consultants, but something's going to get in. So the biggest risk to us is our end employees, our people, the people factor. Are they aware? Do they know what to prepare for? What to be cognizant of the fact that something's going to come in? Can they react? Can they realize what it is that they're looking at? So to me, at least from a practical perspective, from a firm perspective, it's the people factor.
What about you? What about what he based on said on the people factor?
Definitely. I think every RA I've talked to is getting hit right now. It's not a question of if, but it's happening. And it's how people respond to it. It's how your employees are going to respond to it. So the training is really critical. And I think relating as much as you can what that's going to look like and how to spot that and how to respond is really important.
Yeah, when we were at Focus, I can't, there was 90 wealth firms. I can't tell you how many cyber incidents. We were the first line of defense, they would call us, and it was just beyond belief. But at the end of the day, it usually came down to people not following procedures. So they're going to get in, but I think it's a matter of, what kind of training do you have in place? So with that in mind, let's dig into training a little bit more. What are you seeing on the training front, as you're working with multiple wealth firms?
Yeah, I think we tend to overcomplicate cyber training. We've been teaching people how to know things, learn things for a very long time, right? And like just based on school, I have now a 20-year-old. He's in college. Learning something, testing, actually works really well. And so in cybersecurity, one of the things we want to do is make sure that we lay out what are the issues, what is phishing, what is social engineering, what are the procedures that need to be followed, right? And then test, rinse and repeat. Do that over and over again. And not only do we do that at what we call the end user, those are all the users of the firms we work with, but also the managers. When an incident happens, do you know what to do? Do you know the first response? Do you know the team? Do you know how to handle that? That's also something that needs to be tested. On the end user basis, though, just going back there, because I think that's more relevant to the overall when we think about training, make sure they understand and then test them frequently. And testing can be something as simple as a quiz. Like, what do you do when you get a phishing email? Have a simple quiz. And then the other one is more dynamic. Send them simulations, send them phishing exams. Do it through text now. How many of us get more phishing attempts through text than we do through email? That's changed a lot, kind of post-COVID. And test the procedures and the reactions. That works. It's really effective. The firms that don't just do a big once a year phishing campaign and then you don't hear about it for a year, but it's more of a continuous thing, those groups have much more effective results from their cyber training.
What about you guys?
Yeah, we do the phishing training, and it's actually set up, it's scheduled. I don't even have to manage it. It's just automated at this point, which is great. There's some AI built into it now, so it'll figure out what topics somebody needs help on, and it'll tailor more of the stuff it sends them based upon that. Maybe certain keywords, certain methods, but getting it in bite-sized pieces, I think, is really critical. Mm-hmm. You don't want to whack somebody with like an hour-long training, but little bite-sized pieces are more easily digestible. Phishing, texting, obviously really critical. That's going to be the the vector that clients are going to see. So I think it's useful to have your associates be able to spot that, because then they can also potentially help clients identify those kinds of things as well, or at least be familiar with best practices there. And it's kind of ironic because in our firm, we've got our automated phishing campaigns going out, the automated texting, and at the same time we're getting real attempts coming in from the bad guys at the same time. They're becoming sort of interchangeable. I think at the least that is helping everybody realize how serious an issue this is when they're seeing it as frequently as they are now.
It really is. You know, Mario, what about, like, how do you balance sort of the training of your employees with training of your clients? Are you doing anything on that? I mean, I think it's a tough to train them, and we were talking about this before, but do you do anything in that realm?
So for us, we start with awareness. So there has to be an awareness that this is a real risk. It's going to happen. So it applies to both our end staff and what we can control within our firm, and also education, awareness of our clients. Probably the most difficult thing is creating that education for clients. Sometimes creating layers in relation to setting up controls and protocols to protect their user information, and they don't care for it, right? They don't want to go through the cumbersome two-step process or dual factor or having to go through a secure portal of some kind. So creating that awareness is important, creating that education, and actually elevating it to the point where, again, there's a realization and a tangible connection to the client. This is real, you're going to be affected. Many of our firms suffer from the fact that we realize that this is real, but we take a blanket approach, as Bart said, recognizing, text messaging, the advent of AI, what steps are we taking in order to protect our clients as well as our firm, protect ourselves from liabilities, both reputational risk, financial risk, legal and regulatory risk, but above all else, eroding the trust that you have with clients. So it really is a two-way process, educating your staff, but also educating your end client, because more than likely, they're the ones that are going to get hit, probably more or more frequently, or have a greater percentage of getting hit and being victim of cybersecurity fraud than the firm. How do you react to that? How do you educate those clients? So it's really important to apply and have that client factor be a component part of your program and your training process and awareness process.
Yeah, a lot of the things, the incidents that I've seen are where clients were hacked, and then those bad actors actually were able to penetrate the wealth firm as the client, and it came down to that they weren't following procedures, especially when it comes to money movement. What are you guys doing around, like, your procedures for money movement, and what have you seen?
We've been working on this for quite a few years now. We started seeing this, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago. And it's been a fine-tuning process, because as we've seen more attempts come in, we've evolved that to kind of incorporate all the different vectors we're seeing now. But having your money movement procedures be really solidified is super critical, because I think that's what they're probing right now. And the bad guys are really smart, and they're figuring out how to get around certain things. So I think at this point, the procedures we have in place are really solid. What the bad guys are finding now is they're trying to get in as the client, like you're saying. So they're going to hack the client's account and then try to move money out of their accounts. Even if we can kind of see that happening and try to stop it, they're going to try to get that out of there in another way now, like getting in there and linking a fake bank account or attaching another account holder fraudulently using a fake ID or something like that. There's all these different ways they're probing the system, so to speak, and maybe the liability ends up more on the custodian in that situation and less on the advisor. But we're trying to be really dynamic and watch all of this and try to patch as many holes as possible, because even if maybe we're not responsible for money movement fraud, we want to try to stop it any way we can.
Are you seeing anything in that, like helping your clients really come up with like strong money movement policies, procedures? Like, what are you seeing in the money movement area?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bad actors, first of all, understand their motivations. Everything they're trying to do is monetize. So even if they're phishing you, like, why are they phishing you? Maybe it's to get in the door. But eventually, at some point, they're in state. And this is why when people talk about, they're going to get in, sure. what is the definition of that, right? At some point, the capture the flag is movement of money. So that's where you really want to buckle down and check your procedures. Specifically, what we're seeing a lot of people do is video checks. So whether that's a FaceTime, a Zoom, a Teams call, where you're actually speaking to that person. And now someone's going to say to me, yeah, but there's deepfake AI technology, so that's not great. That's not prevalent with most of your clients. That's not going to happen. Right now, if you're not doing that, you're not kind of state of the art, right? If it's pure digital, not good enough. Shameless plug, there's copies of a book I wrote a couple years ago called Cybersmart, which talks about a lot of this stuff. And the opening story is this couple that was buying a house, and their attorney got compromised. They didn't know it. They thought they were communicating with their attorney. He sent wire instructions. They wired the money. Their entire down payment, their payment for their house, gone. It was like $340,000. Horrific, right? You can be either side of that transaction. And so if it's only email-based, text-based, even voicemail-based, you can get compromised. Get your client's face in front of a video. And I know you're saying, I can't do this for every transaction. Set a limit, right? Especially for some of our larger clients, private equity, they will actually, everyone, because they're big checks. Set your limit, but I will tell you, if it's purely email-based, you will have an issue, like guaranteed.
Are you doing anything around video checks? That's kind of a new cool thing. I haven't heard of that.
For the members of my firm who are here, noted, Bart, we don't do video, but something that we could definitely take away from this, I'm taking something away from this, but we do verbal. And even then, we've had situations where it's the perfect storm. We called the client, we had verbal validation. The client was in a place where they had terrible reception, and all they said was yes to, in essence, was this something you submitted to us in writing? Unfortunately, we reliable. So the reality of it is, even if your client, you're not liable as an organization, your end client may view you as a liable party because you are their wealth advisor, you are their asset manager, you are whatever, So there also has to be a recognition of the fact that unintentionally, you may just be a bystander or byproduct of something that's outside of your control. So there's some reputational aspect of that you have to be cognizant of. In our situation, we've now elevated our standards so that above a certain threshold, there has to be a secondary review. But not only that, we have to get into the details. It's not as simple as, hey, John or Jane Doe, did you submit this wire transfer request? It's, can you provide me the specifics? Can you provide me the details of the receiving party, the institution, et cetera? Getting those details are important because, again, the more information you get from that client, the less likely it is that you'll have a breach or a situation of fraud come through the system. So for us, we've elevated the standard. There may be another threshold or another notch we're going to go to thanks to the information we're walking away from here.
Yeah, we saw an incident where at the very last minute, they had infiltrated the client's email. The very last minute, they sent another email changing the wire instructions. So it was for a down payment for a house, and then at the last minute, and they just sent it to the client service person. So they just kind of weren't thinking through. They didn't double check it, and the money didn't get there, and it was over $2 million. And by the time we were able to track it down, a lot of it already had been dispersed out. And again, it goes down to, yes, you can maybe recover it, but it goes down to reputational risk. Like, what are you guys doing there? How could you let this happen to me? So I think that kind of leads us to an area where is really like, how do you respond? We talked about this. Like, it's going to happen, but how you respond and how your firm responds to an incident, I think, is paramount. So let's talk a little bit about incident response. If you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing with your clients.
Yeah, let me start, and this is a little dated now, but I think it's relevant. Do you guys remember when Target and Home Depot got hacked? We're all of age where we probably remember those things. Maybe we're old enough now we've forgotten it, but it was 10 years ago. Within about 9-month period, Target got, all the credit cards at Target got hacked, and then similar at Home Depot. One of those outcomes was judged in the cybersecurity community as a good outcome, and one was not. They both got hacked, but Target's was brutal. Like board members got fired, the CEO, all the technologists got fired. It was brutal. Home Depot's was very smooth. And so when we think about incident response, like in this idea that someone got breached, they're all not the same, right? So there's a range of that. And so how do you ensure you're more Home Depot and less Target, right? How do you kind of put yourself in those shoes? Number one, practice. Like, I think it's shocking people don't practice. If I was hired as an assessor to come in and I had 5 minutes to say how compliant, sorry, getting a call on the watch, how compliant, how mature is your firm, and you gave me 5 minutes. The first question I'm asking is, when was the last time you did a tabletop exercise and who was in the room? Because if the founder of your firm, the head of legal, the head of people is not, and I don't care if you have, like, if it's a 10-person firm or you're 100, who's in that room tells me how seriously you take this issue. If the CEO, the head of the firm is not in that room, you don't take it that seriously. And so they're not practicing, right? And so we do tabletop exercises as a firm, we conduct them for you, and it's war games. We will simulate. So this happens. What do you do? Do you know what to do? It's like imagining that if you're a football team, you can go out on Sundays and execute your play and you've never practiced it, right? No one would think that's a good strategy. And so how many of you think of it, like tomorrow, we've all said you're gonna get hacked. It's gonna be worse. So are you actually practicing your response? And so when we think about, like, response, have a plan, practice it over and over, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we see the firms that actually have the best outcomes from these incidents.
How about you guys? Are you doing tabletop exercises, and what does that look like for your firm?
So if you don't mind me taking a step back, putting my compliance regulatory risks hat on, probably the worst situation you could have is, say that you have an incident response plan, a business continuity plan, and it's absolutely irrelevant to how your firm is, the makeup of your firm and specific to your firm. I think that that's probably just as bad as not having anything at all. But to Bart's point, and I think it's important to have, keeping the same analogy, is if you have a playbook, you don't want to actually run the play at the moment where you're the most stressed, you're the most, concerned, you're running around. That's what practice is for, and that's what the tabletop exercises are important. We're continuously looking to enhance ours and apply them specific to the makeup of our firm. So one of the things that we're doing is, as our firm has grown, we want to bring all the appropriate stakeholders and parties into those tabletop exercises so that we are prepared. To Bart's point, you have to be cognizant of who's in the room. The important people, the decision makers, need to be in that room in that practice session. Your star players cannot sit the practice out and expect to come in only when it's time, when it's game time. You're destined for failure, and it's going to be an unsuccessful plan. So it's really, really important. The practice itself is so important. An emphasis that we're putting, at least in our firm, and this is something that I'm seeing around my network of my network, is it really is. It's all about practice. It's rinse and repeat, as Bart said earlier.
So you've done a lot of M&A for your shop, and I can imagine, at Focus, like when I would look at a firm, I would look to see like how secure are they and what are we going to need to do. When you bring a new firm on, do you actually like put them through your own cyber training and how do you fold them in? Because you're doing a lot of acquisitions.
That's right, Amy. So what we do is so part of the due diligence is looking at their overall risk profile, including, cybersecurity risks that they may have. I'm looking to see how sophisticated their policies and procedures are, because we fold them in, they in essence adopt, and they're expected to adopt our policies and procedures. Through that process, it's important to recognize, to me at least, it's a gap analysis. They're here and we are somewhere here. So getting them adjusted to and to our culture, through that gap analysis, it's how hard will it be? What is it that we need to do? What is it that we need to focus on, at least in that transitionary period, so that we can get them up to date? Is it seamless? I'd be lying if I said it is, but it is something that I have to be relentless, and we have to be relentless in order to mitigate the risks of, again, going back to something I said earlier, the people factor. They are our first and last line of defense in relation to the risk that this presents to our respective firms. So it's important for us to, stay on it, put them through our training program, have individual training with them, recognize where it is, and actually highlight, justify or prepare the training so understand this is what you did previously, this is what you will do here with us. This is the differences between the two processes. So it really is a lot of, hand-holding, again, repeating, putting them through the training, putting them through simulations, things of that nature in order to make sure that they understand what we're doing and in order to align everything.
I think the documentation piece is really important. I think another useful exercise is going through like every system you use, everything in the tech stack, documenting everywhere where client data lives, which is going to be a lot of places these days, most likely, if you're using web applications, third-party programs, things like that. I know in our case, it's grown pretty tremendously over the last 5 years, because it's not just your own system, but anybody else could be hacked too. And the scary part is, if somebody else gets hacked, it's not even your fault. You may still be on the hook indirectly for that, or at least
Absolutely,
have
it's your
some
RA.
reputational issue.
That's the danger of M&A. People don't realize once you acquire that firm, they are your firm, they are your RA, they are your risk. So if you're acquiring a firm that doesn't have they're tight down, you have to double down to make sure as soon as those documents are signed and as soon as they're part of your RA, you are on the hook for it. So it's really, really important to make sure, as you're kind of looking at acquirers and looking to be acquired, that you're really thinking about the cyber aspect of it. How in the penetration testing, like how often do you see your clients doing that? Is it like scheduled? Or?
Yeah, I think we do a ton of pen testing. I would say we like to see one comprehensive pen test a year, followed by kind of two more what we consider more automated pen tests. But here's the thing about a pen test. A lot of people go, I did a pen test, I'm done. There's findings from a pen test. And you need to do something with those findings. They're going to tell you about vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities, not just in software, but in procedure, in architecture, in what Shane was just talking about, our data is expanded. We call that surface area in the cybersecurity world. Like the surface area of your devices, of your data, of your people has just quadrupled in probably, I think it's about 6 years. What happened with post-COVID was our homes became part of the surface area of our firms. So you have to think about that. Pen tests now, like pen tests are evolving. Make sure you work with someone who has a more modern pen test. This idea that our firm is just in the four walls is no longer. And so you want a more modern, evolved pen test, and then do something with it.
So we used to have the wall of shame. And I know it sounds, but like who failed, and how many times, like when the CEO is failing over and over, you're like, come on, we got a problem here. What about you guys? Do you do anything around like once you've done the tests or once you've done the phishing, do you kind of like, what's the follow-up?
So Shane said something that's important, documentation. So going back to penetration testing or the findings of any of your testing that you're performing, it's what you do with that information. It's not intended to be for it to sit static, and you think that you're mitigating your liability through that. In fact, I would argue you're enhancing your liability if there's findings and you absolutely do nothing about it. So there's a recognition of the fact that there's a vulnerability, there's something that you should be paying attention to, and you decide to look away or turn a blind eye, or not to react appropriately. So I think that that's really, really important. We do penetration testing. We do everything. We do one every 2 years for us. We do vulnerability tests as well. It's really important for us to just have an awareness and kind of a self-assessment of a report card of our overall infrastructure. But I think the biggest thing, and I think one of the biggest obstacles that I see many facing, is what Amy said earlier, is like some of your biggest liabilities and your repetitive violators are probably the executives at your firm, the principals. And I apologize if there's principals in the audience right now, but oftentimes, you tell your staff, don't hold me to a different standard, but you're saying it, but you don't mean it. And then, so sometimes you have to make sure that you follow through and that you actually go through and hold them to the same standard. So it's really important that, again, going back to the documentation only gets you so far. It's what are you gonna do in reaction to your findings, and then document that as well. So it's really important that you apply, as one of my mentors told me, give yourself credit for the work that you're doing. It's really critical. And that also helps you when you do have a vulnerability, when you will have a situation in which you're going to be compromised. Well, this is a means to mitigate that liability, to show that you're proactive, that you've taken steps, to correct actions that you've seen or issues that you've seen. And again, it's not bulletproof, so there's going to be openings there, but there's at least that show of a willingness or proactiveness to try to fix things.
Yeah, I think like Bart was saying, the executive sponsorship's really critical. If they're not in the room, and they're not on board, that's going to be an issue that needs to be addressed. I think these days too, there needs to be an expectation that more resources are going to have to be applied to this area, whether firms like it or not. It's going to be a budget item. I think you have one or two big scares, maybe that the pushback becomes less there, but this is a real serious issue, and you can't, like remediation, that's going to cost money. When you do a pen test, you have to remediate it. That's a resource. It's somebody's time, or a service provider.
Absolutely. Again, it's your reputation. Once you lose the faith of your client that you don't have it covered, your reputation. So, and it drives me crazy when I see people like not wanting to invest money into their cyber programs, or, hey, I don't have to do this because I'm the boss. So absolutely not. So we have a little bit of time left here. I wanted to do like a quick lightning round. I think what I find really interesting right now is, what do you think about AI and machine learning and how maybe it can be leveraged for the defenses of cyber? Are you seeing anything in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot. AI is going to make things worse before it makes things better, is my take. I think there's a real asymmetric risk right now where the bad actors are getting access to a lot of tools, phishing, code review, where they can find holes faster, they can exploit faster, and defenses are almost by their nature much slower. And the reason why it's so asymmetric is the power of AI right now. I do have hope kind of in a longer term that once AI is more integrated into our defenses, that we're going to be, I think we're going to be well equipped, but it's going to be a bumpy ride getting there, is my 2 cents in the coming, 24, 36 months.
So we have a question from, the audience, I guess. And if you don't want to answer this, it's okay. If you've had a breach, how have you communicated it with your clients? And maybe if you haven't had one, but maybe you can let us know if you have, and how did you communicate it?
I'm not going to confirm or deny that we've had one, but if we did have one, communicating with clients is really important. You have to have an awareness, so you have to have appropriate insurance, communicate with the insurance first and foremost, even before you communicate with your clients. Be aware through your vendors and whom you're going to work with, possibly working with a law firm, to understand state-specific requirements, because different states have different requirements in relation to notification to clients. Some have de minimis, some don't, so it's really important. You also have to report this oftentimes to the individual states. As an RIA, as a fiduciary, we have responsibility to be transparent with our clients. So absolutely, we have to communicate with any one of those clients that have been breached.
Yeah, as a firm I've run a firm for 15 years. We have 300 employees. We've absolutely been breached. And I'm a cybersecurity person. My firm's cybersecurity. We need to demystify this idea that saying you've had a breach is bad. It's like saying you've been burglarized. You're not at fault. So it's okay to say you've been breached. The way you communicate early, often, tell everything that's happened, be transparent. There's no shame, right? We have to demystify that.
Well, and keep in mind too, the SEC draft rule that's out there is saying firms will probably have to report within 48 hours of being aware of a significant breach. So you need to have that plan in place, or potentially you might have regulatory issues in addition to all the other, black marks in a case like that.
All right, well, I think we are getting ready to wrap it. I want to thank everybody for being part of this. It really is a scary time for all of us, but it's so important to keep your firms and your clients safe. So hopefully you learned a little bit today, and appreciate you being here. And have a great time at Future Proof.